The Dying Light. The Krellian Empire had stood for 12,000 years. Its crystal spires reached toward the heavens on 1,000 worlds, monuments to stability and wisdom that had guided the galaxy through dark ages and golden epochs alike. For centuries beyond counting, the Krellian diplomatic corps had settled disputes between younger species, preventing wars before they could begin. Their vast knowledge repositories contained the accumulated wisdom of 500 civilizations. They had been the backbone of galactic civilization, the steady hand that kept chaos at bay. Now they were dying. Chancellor Theron stood in what remained of the Grand Council chamber on Corellia Prime, watching his world burn through the shattered dome overhead. The air still held the acrid taste of weapon discharge and burning metal. Around him, the bodies of his fellow council members lay where they had fallen, cut down by Vorthak boarding parties before they could even reach the evacuation shuttles. The Vorthak had come from the dark spaces between spiral arms, a species that had evolved in the crushing gravity of rogue planets drifting through the void. They were massive creatures, each warrior standing 3 meters tall with armor-like carapaces that could shrug off conventional weapons. But their true strength lay not in their physical power, but in their philosophy. They saw civilization as weakness, cooperation as foolishness, and mercy as the ultimate sin. They had struck without warning 6 months ago, emerging from hyperspace with a fleet that dwarfed anything the galaxy had seen in living memory. The Krellian defense forces, formidable by any standard, had lasted 3 weeks. The Solari Confederation, known for their tactical brilliance, fell in days. The Namari Collective, whose shield technology was considered impenetrable, watched their worlds crack open like eggs under sustained bombardment. Now the Vorthak swept across the galaxy like a cleansing fire, leaving nothing but silence in their wake. They took no prisoners, established no colonies, demanded no tribute. They simply erased everything they encountered and moved on to the next system. Theron clutched a small data crystal in his weathered hand. It contained the last desperate hope of the Galactic Assembly, a message coded for one specific destination. A world that had gone silent 40 years ago, a species that had retreated behind walls of their own making after suffering losses that would have destroyed any other civilization. Earth. Theron had been young when humanity first made contact with the broader galactic community. He remembered the excitement, the curiosity, the eager way these strange bipedal creatures absorbed knowledge and reached out to embrace the cosmos. They had been so full of potential, so ready to take their place among the stars. Then the Reaper Plague had struck. A biological weapon created by the Harkoth Dominion during their civil war, it had escaped containment and spread through space on merchant vessels. For most species, it caused nothing worse than mild discomfort. For humans, it was death. Swift, agonizing, and utterly unavoidable. Earth had lost 4 billion people before they found a cure. Another billion died in the chaos that followed, as societies collapsed and desperate survivors fought over dwindling resources. When it was over, humanity had looked at the galaxy that had accidentally poisoned them and made a choice. They sealed their borders, withdrew their ships, and disappeared behind a wall of silence. For 40 years, Earth had been a ghost in galactic records. Automated defense satellites destroyed any vessel that approached their system without warning. All communication attempts were met with static. The galaxy had written them off as another casualty of the plague, too broken to recover, too traumatized to rejoin the community of worlds. But Theron had done his research during these desperate months. He had accessed old intelligence reports, studied human military history, analyzed their response to previous crises. What he found gave him something he had not felt in weeks. He found hope. Humans were survivors. More than that, they were adapters. Every time their species had faced extinction, they had emerged stronger and more determined. Their history was written in blood and perseverance, a story of a species that simply refused to accept defeat no matter how inevitable it seemed. If any civilization could help them now, it was humanity. If any species had the stubborn determination to stand against the Vorthak, it was the ones who had clawed their way back from the edge of extinction. The question was whether they would answer. Whether 40 years of isolation had transformed them into something willing to help those who had accidentally caused them so much pain. Theron activated his personal communicator, connecting to the last functional relay station in the sector. This is Chancellor Theron of the Krellian Empire. Transmit Emergency Protocol Omega-7. Target, Sol System, Planet Earth. Message reads, the galaxy is dying. We need your help. Please. We're sorry for everything. But we need you. The relay station confirmed transmission, the signal racing through hyperspace toward a system that had been silent for 4 decades. Theron did not know if anyone would receive it. He did not know if humanity still existed as anything more than scattered survivors hiding in the ruins of their civilization. He only knew that it was their last chance. 3 light-years away, in the cold darkness between stars, Commander Sarah Mitchell stood on the bridge of the USS Defiant and listened to the message play for the 3rd time. Her crew stood silent around her, faces grim as they processed what they were hearing. The Defiant was one of 12 vessels that made up Earth's deep space fleet, ships that patrolled the void beyond their quarantine zone, watching for threats and ensuring that no one got close enough to their world to do more harm. They were the descendants of the survivors, men and women who had been born into a world still recovering from catastrophe, who had grown up learning that the galaxy was dangerous and trust was a luxury humanity could no longer afford. Sarah was 42 years old, which meant she had been a child when the plague struck. She remembered the sirens, the emergency broadcasts, the way her mother had held her tight while her father died coughing blood in the next room. She remembered the mass graves, the burned cities, the terrible silence that fell over Earth as billions of voices were permanently stilled. She also remembered the fury. The helpless rage of a child who could not understand why no one from the vast galactic civilization had been able to help them, why the cure had come too late, why her father and so many others had to die while aliens watched from their distant, safe worlds. That fury had driven her to join the military as soon as she was old enough, had pushed her through the grueling training that forged Earth's new defenders, had sustained her through 20 years of watching the darkness beyond their borders for threats that never came. Until now. Commander. Lieutenant James Park, her second officer, broke the silence. Command is requesting your recommendation. Sarah looked at the young man. Park had been born after the plague, part of the new generation that knew the tragedy only through history lessons and memorials. He did not carry the same scars she did, but he had been raised in the world those scars created. A world that had learned to be hard, to be suspicious, to put survival above all else. Tell Command, Sarah said slowly, that I recommend we ignore the transmission. It's not our fight. The galaxy made that clear 40 years ago when they left us to die alone. Park nodded, but his expression was troubled. Permission to speak freely, Commander. Granted. My grandfather was a doctor during the plague. He worked himself to death trying to save people, 18-hour shifts for weeks on end until his heart gave out. Park's voice was steady, but his eyes held old pain. Before he died, he told my father that the worst part wasn't the dying. It was knowing that somewhere out there, there were beings with the technology and knowledge to help, and they were doing nothing because we weren't important enough to save. Sarah felt something twist in her chest. She knew where this was going. If we ignore this message, Park continued, if we let those people die because we're afraid or angry or can't forgive the past, then we become what hurt us. We become the ones who have the power to help and choose not to use it. The bridge was silent. Sarah looked around at her crew, seeing the same conflict written on their faces. They were all survivors or descendants of survivors. They all carried the same scars, the same memories, the same deep and justified anger at a galaxy that had failed them. But they were also human. And humanity had never been good at walking away from those in need, even when every logical bone in their bodies screamed that they should. Sarah made her decision. Helm, plot a course for the coordinates in that transmission. Engineering, I want every spare ounce of power diverted to engines. We're going to need speed. Commander, Park said, a hint of relief in his voice, Command is going to have questions. Tell Command, Sarah replied, that the Defiant is responding to a distress call. Tell them we're going to remind the galaxy what humanity stands for. And tell them that when we come back, we'll be bringing answers about what's really happening out there. She turned to face her crew, seeing determination replace doubt on their faces. I won't lie to you. We don't know what we're flying into. We don't know if we can make a difference or if we're sailing into a trap. But 40 years ago, the galaxy watched us die and did nothing. We have a chance to be better than that. We have a chance to show them that humanity didn't just survive, we became stronger. The crew responded with a chorus of affirmations, hands moving across control panels as the Defiant's engines came to full power. All hands, battle stations, Sarah ordered. We're going to war. And when we arrive, the Vorthak are going to learn what happens when you threaten innocent lives while humanity is watching. The Defiant turned away from Earth's distant sun and plunged into hyperspace, racing toward a galaxy in flames, carrying with it the desperate hope of a species that had learned to survive the unsurvivable. Behind them, Earth's defense network registered their departure and relayed the information to command. In bunkers deep beneath Earth's scarred surface, generals and politicians debated what to do about the rogue ship racing toward danger. Some called for recall. Others demanded Mitchell's arrest upon return. But one voice, older and wiser than the rest, spoke into the silence. Let her go. Let them all see what we've become. 40 years ago, the galaxy left us to die. Now they'll learn that you don't kill humanity. You just make us angry. The Defiant streaked through hyperspace, a single ship carrying the weight of humanity's fury and compassion in equal measure, racing toward a confrontation that would reshape the galaxy's understanding of what it meant to be human. The Galactic Assembly's last stronghold was not the grand facility that Chancellor Theron remembered from his youth. That magnificent station, orbiting the neutral world of Parliax, had been vaporized in the first week of the Vorthak invasion. What remained was a hastily constructed outpost built into an asteroid in an unnamed system, chosen for its obscurity rather than its strategic value. Commander Sarah Mitchell brought the Defiant out of hyperspace at the coordinates provided in the distress signal, and what she saw made her breath catch in her throat. The asteroid station was surrounded by hundreds of ships, but these were not warships. They were cargo haulers converted into transports, luxury liners stripped of their amenities to carry refugees, even personal yachts packed far beyond their designed capacity. Every vessel bore the scars of desperate flight, hull plates scorched by weapons fire, emergency repairs visible even from a distance. My God, Lieutenant Park whispered from his station. How many people are out there? Sensors reading approximately 3 million life signs across the fleet, replied Ensign Chen from Tactical. Multiple species. Commander, some of those ships are barely holding together. Their life support systems are failing. Sarah felt the anger that had sustained her through the journey begin to transform into something else. These were not the proud civilizations that had turned their backs on Earth during the plague. These were survivors, refugees who had lost everything, clinging to life in the cold void of space. Hail the station, she ordered. Let them know we're here in response to their distress call. The response came quickly, a holographic image materializing above the communications console. Chancellor Theron appeared, and Sarah was shocked by how much the Krellian leader had aged since the last images in Earth's databases. His crystalline features, once vibrant with inner light, were dim and cracked. His robes were torn and stained. Human vessel, Theron said, his voice thick with emotion. You came. After everything, you actually came. We received your distress call, Chancellor, Sarah replied, keeping her tone professional. What's your situation? Theron's expression crumbled. We have perhaps 3 days before the Vorthak find us. Our defenses consist of 47 ships, most of them damaged beyond any hope of effective combat. We have 3 million refugees and nowhere left to run. He paused, his eyes meeting Sarah's across the light years that separated their worlds. I do not expect you to save us. I do not deserve to ask for your help after what happened to your people. But please, if you can evacuate even some of the children, some of the young ones who had nothing to do with the plague. Sarah cut him off. How many Vorthak ships are we talking about? Theron blinked in surprise. Our intelligence suggests their fleet in this sector consists of approximately 200 vessels. But Commander, you must understand. 200 ships, Sarah repeated, turning to her tactical officer. Chen, what's our weapons status? All systems nominal, Commander. Plasma cannons at full charge, missile bays loaded, point defense systems online. The new graviton disruptors are untested in combat, but simulations suggest they'll be effective. Good. Sarah turned back to Theron. Chancellor, we're going to need tactical data on the Vorthak. Everything you know about their weapons, their tactics, their ship configurations. Commander Mitchell, Theron said carefully, you have one ship. One ship against 200. I appreciate your courage, but this is suicide. Please, just take whoever you can fit aboard and leave before. Chancellor. Sarah's voice was cold steel. 40 years ago, Earth was dying. We sent out calls for help. We begged the galaxy to send medical supplies, researchers, anything that might save our people. Do you know how many ships answered that call? Theron's light dimmed further. I know. I am sorry. We failed you. 0, Sarah continued. 0 ships came. The galaxy decided we weren't worth the risk, weren't worth the resources. 4 billion people died while the so-called civilized species of this galaxy calculated the profit margins of humanitarian aid. She leaned forward. But we survived. We adapted. We learned. And one thing we learned is that when someone asks for help, you don't calculate the odds. You don't measure the risk. You answer the call. She straightened, her voice taking on a tone of absolute authority. Now, Chancellor, you have 2 choices. You can waste time arguing with me about whether we should help you, or you can provide the tactical data we need to plan our defense. Which is it going to be? For the first time in months, something like hope flickered in Theron's eyes. Defense? You intend to defend this position? We intend to win, Sarah corrected. Now, transmit your data and prepare your fleet. Earth is about to show the galaxy what happens when you back humans into a corner. Over the next 48 hours, the Defiant became the nerve center of a defense that should have been impossible. Sarah and her crew worked with the Assembly's military coordinators, analyzing every piece of intelligence on the Vorthak, studying their attack patterns, identifying their weaknesses. What they found was disturbing. The Vorthak were not just powerful, they were adaptive. They learned from each battle, modified their tactics, evolved their strategies. Traditional military doctrine was useless against them because they had already encountered every conventional approach the galaxy could devise. But humanity had not been part of the galactic military establishment for 40 years. They had spent those decades developing their own doctrines, their own technologies, forged in isolation and driven by the determination never to be helpless again. Lieutenant Park worked with the Assembly's engineers, helping them understand the modifications Earth had made to standard ship designs. The Defiant's hull was layered with reactive armor that could absorb and redirect energy weapons. Its power plant was a fusion antimatter hybrid that produced 3 times the output of comparable vessels. Its weapons systems incorporated principles that humanity had developed independently, unrestrained by galactic conventions about acceptable warfare. But the real surprise was the crew themselves. Commander Mitchell called a meeting with the Assembly's military leaders on the second day. In addition to Chancellor Theron, she was joined by Admiral Kelvin of the Solari, General Vorash of the Namari, and a dozen other officers representing the remnants of their fleets. The Vorthak have conquered every species they've encountered, Sarah began, displaying tactical data on a holographic screen. They've done this because they're physically superior, technologically advanced, and utterly ruthless. But they have one critical weakness that you haven't been able to exploit. And what is that? Admiral Kelvin asked, his tone skeptical. They don't understand sacrifice, Sarah replied. They see civilization as weakness because cooperation requires trust, and trust requires vulnerability. They fight as individuals, each ship operating independently to maximize its own survival and glory. They've never faced an opponent willing to sacrifice everything for the person next to them. She brought up footage from Earth's military history, showing battles where humans had held impossible positions, made suicidal stands, thrown themselves on grenades to save their comrades. The alien officers watched in horrified fascination. Humans are not physically superior to the Vorthak, Sarah continued. We're not smarter or faster or stronger. But we have one advantage. We understand that sometimes the only way to win is to be willing to lose everything. We understand that there are things worth dying for. You're suggesting a suicide attack, Vorash said flatly. I'm suggesting we make them pay such a high price for every meter they advance that they start to question whether this fight is worth it. Sarah's eyes were hard. The Vorthak have won every battle because their opponents were trying to survive. We're going to show them what happens when your opponent doesn't care about survival. When your opponent only cares about making you hurt. Chancellor Theron spoke quietly. Commander, what you're describing, it's everything the Krellian Empire stood against. We built our civilization on the principle that life is precious, that it should be preserved and protected. And where did that get you? Sarah asked, not unkindly. Chancellor, I respect what you tried to build. But the Vorthak have made it clear that civilization cannot survive by being civilized. Sometimes, you have to be willing to become a monster to fight monsters. She turned back to the tactical display. Here's what we're going to do. When the Vorthak arrive, we're going to give them exactly what they expect, a defensive formation trying to protect the refugee fleet. They'll commit their forces to breaking through, confident in their superiority. And while they're focused on the battle line, the Defiant will do what we do best. Which is? Kelvin asked. Sarah smiled, and it was not a pleasant expression. We'll remind them that Earth is a death world. And humans are its apex predators. The Vorthak fleet arrived on schedule, dropping out of hyperspace in a formation that spoke of absolute confidence. 200 massive warships, each one bristling with weapons, each one carrying thousands of warriors who had never known defeat. Their commander, war leader Kroth, observed the defensive formation and felt something approaching satisfaction. The prey had arranged themselves in a standard defensive shell, exactly as predicted. They would die quickly, efficiently, their worlds added to the growing list of Vorthak conquests. He did not notice the single human ship that had separated from the formation, its stealth systems rendering it invisible to Vorthak sensors as it positioned itself behind their fleet. The battle began with a devastating Vorthak barrage. Energy weapons lanced through space, tearing into the assembly's defensive line. Ships exploded, shields failed, crews died. It was the same story that had played out across 100 worlds. But then something changed. The assembly ships did not break. They did not flee. Instead, they fought with a desperation that surprised even Kroth. Ships with failing shields rammed Vorthak vessels, detonating their reactors to take their enemies with them. Damaged cruisers used their last moments to position themselves as shields for their intact companions. Crews stayed at their posts even as their ships burned around them. And through it all, a single human voice broadcast across all channels, steady and unwavering. All ships, this is Commander Mitchell. Hold the line. Make them pay for every meter. Remember why we're here. Remember who we're protecting. The Vorthak pushed forward, confused by the fierce resistance but confident in their eventual victory. They had seen desperate last stands before. They always ended the same way. Then the Defiant struck. The human ship emerged from stealth directly in the center of the Vorthak formation, its weapons already firing. But these were not the energy weapons Kroth knew. These were graviton disruptors, weapons that manipulated spacetime itself, crushing Vorthak ships from within as if caught in the grip of a collapsing star. 5 ships died in the first volley. 10 more in the second. Croth ordered his fleet to turn, to destroy this impudent attacker, but the Defiant was already moving, its engines powered by principles the Vorthak had never encountered. It danced through their formation like a predator among prey, never where they expected, always striking from an unexpected angle. And all the while, Commander Mitchell's voice continued. This is for Earth. This is for the 4 billion we lost. This is for every species you've destroyed, every world you've burned. This is humanity's answer to your question. The battle raged for hours. The assembly fleet fought with renewed determination, inspired by the fury of the human ship in their midst. The Vorthak, for the first time in their conquering history, began to feel something they had never experienced. Fear. When it was over, 93 Vorthak ships lay destroyed or disabled. The remaining vessels retreated into hyperspace, carrying with them the impossible news that they had been defeated. The Defiant limped back to the assembly fleet, its hull scarred but unbroken. Commander Sarah Mitchell stood on her bridge, exhausted but victorious, as Chancellor Theron's image appeared once more. How? The Krellian leader asked simply. Sarah looked at him with tired eyes. You asked us to help. We're humans, Chancellor. When someone needs help, we don't calculate the odds. We don't measure our chances of success. We just answer the call. She paused, then added quietly. 40 years ago, you failed us. But we survived. And we learned that if we want the galaxy to be a place worth living in, we have to be willing to fight for it. Not because it's easy. Not because it's safe. But because it's right. Theron's crystalline features glowed with renewed light. What do you need from us, Commander? Everything, Sarah replied. Ships, supplies, coordinates for every Vorthak position you know. We're going hunting, Chancellor. And we're not going to stop until the galaxy is safe again. She turned to her crew. Signal Earth. Tell them we're going to need reinforcements. Tell them the Deep Space Fleet is officially going to war. As the message raced back to Sol System, as the assembly fleet began to reorganize under human leadership, as the galaxy started to learn that humanity had not just survived their isolation but had emerged stronger, Sarah Mitchell allowed herself a small smile. The Vorthak had thought they were facing a galaxy of sheep. They had not realized that among those sheep, hiding in the darkness, waiting for the right moment, was a wolf. And that wolf was very, very angry.